going to kick things off. So first, Mark and MK, I'd love you guys just to kind of give your own journey to where you got today and talk more about the organizations that you've obviously been a part of. And I'm sure a lot of people can learn from each of your own, leadership journeys. So Dr. Dorsey, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. No, it's really a pleasure. Thank you all so much for taking the time on an otherwise hopefully warm and beautiful Wednesday, wherever it is where you may be. Good evening or good afternoon or maybe good morning for some. In the main, what I am is a renewable energy investor. We've invested in two relatively large commercial industrial PV developers. That sort of began things, and the rest from there is perhaps, as they say, has been a bit of history, but has put us also into investing in a PV module manufacturer, doing some joint venture building with some partners in the US. The most of our work has been focused in emerging markets and primarily outside of Europe, or outside of the US rather, in Europe and emerging markets. We've also along the way sort of diversified a bit, and we were part of the Series A round of capital for something called Change Finance, which if those folks who are following that, and I'll put some of this in the chat, the ticker is CHGX. It's on the nice ARCA. We went to IPO in 2017, and just the past month crossed a nice milestone in the eyes of institutional investors, coming under just over 50 million AUM. And we've been doing outperforming those other, we call them the Standard and Poor fools, the fossil fools that are out there. Q on Q, we've been outperforming that kind of foolishness because we are a large cap, fossil fuel free exchange traded fund. Please check us out online. You can get the details there. So really, that sort of trajectory on the business side, sits atop one of, being involved in some scholarship production, as well as policy work, in a variety of domains, and we can get into that. But that's how I come to this, to this space. And really also working across a variety of domains, not just on the business side, but also within the multilateral context, being involved in, I would say the sort of the genesis of what we now sort of take, or some of you perhaps take for granted, the sustainability architecture, the multilateral sustainability architecture. I happen to be a member of the US delegation at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, some almost 30 years ago, what we call the Earth Summit, which was the space. It was 30 years ago, actually, this month. We were at the fourth PrepCon for the Rio Summit. And that architecture gave forth what we all now know as the Conference of the Parties process and other things that have set the world on a course to hopefully deliver sustainability, deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, but also thwart things like climate injustice, environmental injustice, and build the necessary architectures and governance structures to really deliver us, can we say, from evil, perhaps, but really get us on a path for a really, I think, hopeful future, one that's not rooted in injustice and cacistocratic kleptocracies and so forth, whether they be at home or abroad. So that's a sort of a top shelf for folks. And so thanks for having this discussion. Thanks to the Seaworthy team and everyone else.
Thank you. We're thrilled to have you. And, it's always fun to explore the synergies between all the different sides of the field. So thank you so much for the work that you've done. Dr. Abbott, love to hear your side of the story.
Yep. So I'm Mark Abbott. So just a brief, I'll try and keep it short. Started out a long time ago, California kid, grew up in the Palo Alto Bay Area, Berkeley and Davis, limnology, Lake Tahoe, which is a great way to start your oceanography career. Because at the end of your day cruise, you can sit on the side of the lake and have a margarita, which is something you can't do on a research vessel. Anyway, sort of got involved in sort of physical biological interactions. My advisor, it's just sort of part of the history, was very much into technology. In fact, this will show my age. First person really to tow a fluorometer underwater and collect digital data back in the day. It used to be you collected data on strip charts and then hand digitized it. So we had a 7-track, 200 bit per inch magnetic tape recorder, which was a big deal back then. But that set me on a page to really look at ocean sciences and sort of ecosystems. A PhD was in ecology at that time. Got into satellite remote sensing, joint position with Scripps and Jet Propulsion Lab. So again, got involved with a big, Michael mentioned it, Dr. Dorsey mentioned it earlier, the Rio Summit. I got involved with NASA's Earth Observing System, which is part of the US Global Change Research Program, which all sort of grew up, got involved in the Joint Global Ocean Flux Study. So the big global programs. And as a young scientists, that was an amazing era to interact internationally, science and technology. Continue that at Oregon State. Again, the usual big federal agencies working on underwater optics. Actually did go to sea, didn't just use satellites. And continued that sort of geekiness. You can see in my back, that is a working 1985 Macintosh with a 0.5 megabyte of memory that still boots and boots up as fast as my latest iMac on the desktop. So back in the day, that's what we did, got into massively parallel computing. And then 5 years ago, came to Woods Hole Oceanographic. Didn't think we would stay in New England, but we put down pretty deep roots. I'm now stepped down. Peter Domenical, who came from Lamont, is now the director. My plan was always to put in 5 years and then do other things. And now sort of spending a year sabbatical with Woods Hole. But again, focusing a lot on ocean technology, keeping the connections in with the Silicon Valley venture world, really trying to say, how do we bring the science and the technology together to meet all of the important goals that have been laid out by programs like the UN Decade? Because it's a different time than it was 30, 40 years ago, but it's an exciting time. And I think actually it's better. One, the technology is a lot more capable. It's a lot more democratized, which gives challenges to big institutions like Scripps and Woods Hole. They're the incumbents. And the challenge too is now you do have to bring in not just the science and the government and tell government, here's what you should do, which we've been doing, I would say, fairly poorly for the last 30 years. But you really want to engage with the business sector and the local communities to enable people to do more sort of an exploration and test rather than a predict and then act. We're working with a world that's very complex, changing in ways we can't predict. And so we have to have a much more engaged and system of systems approach, not just technology and science, but the people, policy, et cetera. So we're really pretty exciting time to see. It's going to be challenging, but there's certainly a lot of interest. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. And I mean, the points that you just brought up are exciting, I think, across all fields, as far as just the pace of technology and prototyping and what that means to disrupting the, I think, historic academic, I don't want to say too broadly, but bureaucratic inefficiencies that we've experienced, right? So it's an interesting thing to witness, and I'm seeing that in real time here in Miami as we start building the blue tech scene here. So we're really excited to definitely explore each of your thoughts on this. So with that, we're going to kind of start broad, and then we'll get a little more nitty gritty as we go along. But the first question I have for the both of you guys is, how do you define an effective leader? Dr. Dorsey, would you like to answer first?
For me and what I do, that really is somebody who is efficient and fast and quick. Everyone likes to think that they're the smartest one in the room. But as I like to tell, folks at my alma mater in New Haven, only if it were true, there wouldn't be homelessness, there wouldn't be poverty, there wouldn't be all the normal problems that surround an institution that claims it's the best and the smartest and the brightest. But I think, it's not so much about the brains, but it's about being efficient and quick. And I think that's certainly the case, one might assume in business, but I think it's also the case in science. I think it's a case in policy. No one would really have dreamt up in the early days of the UNFCCC process, the sort of the early architecture days in the late 80s and early 90s, when that process was coming together, that we would have heads of state denying science and pretending that it wouldn't exist. But in the face of such things, those countries that can be quick, those institutions that can be quick and be efficient, I think will end up on the right side of history, as it were. So I think of that, speed and efficiency are sort of the sine qua non of what it means to really be, best in class leader.
And an interesting point from the innovation sphere to add to that too. I love the expression "fail hard, fail fast, and fail often," right? Rather than draw it out and draw out the pain as well. So I totally agree. Dr. Abbott, how about you?
Sure. This is kind of a flip side. It's not an opposite. It's sort of a different look at it. I liked a book by Amy Edmondson from Harvard called The Fearless Organization, and really might want to look at it. And she talks a lot about innovation, and she talks about that fearless organizations, not only just the successful failures, which is important, but it invites the participation and it really responds to challenges and questions productively. And I remember giving a talk about a year and a half ago at the US Naval Academy at a big nationwide STEM conference they had. Somebody said, "Are universities fearless?" And I said, "Actually, no." I think universities often don't invite participation. And too often I see postdocs and assistant scientists or assistant professors, they want to get ahead. And that holds organizations back. It doesn't mean you go off just willy-nilly, but a leader enables those conversations and that dialogue to happen. A leader recognizes with a lot of humility, you're not the smartest person in the room. There's a lot of smart people in the room who know different things, and orchestrating that and enabling that to happen in a productive way is really hard because people have strong opinions, academics, some of the strongest, and that's good, but it can hold things back. So I think in this day and age, a leader really needs to embrace that. The second part, I would say, again, sort of not shamelessly shilling books, but there's a book by Seibel called Digital Transformation. I think in the old days, the old CEOs of the world, where it was sort of a command and control, you've got to be very facile, not only be fearless, but understand all of the aspects of your business. You've got to be not just business savvy and politically savvy, you've got to understand the technology. So a leader today is very different than it was 10, 20 years ago. And I think, you can look at the General Motors and the GE CEOs, and that's fine. You can really produce a production line, but that innovation, that nimbleness that Dr. Dorsey was talking about really falls by the wayside. And I think a new leader really has to embrace that uncertainty and not just say, "Wow, I hate it." You've got to use that for you.
And what better time to embrace it than during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
It's been interesting to see those pivots kind of really test leadership or develop it to really, I think, almost be this implicit trust in that whatever we're doing has to work because there is no option B, right?
Yep.
Great points. Thank you so much. I'll throw it back to you for the next question to start, Mark. What are some missed opportunities in current ocean and climate science leadership, and what shifts need to happen to facilitate filling those gaps?
Okay. So again, since this is mainly sort of on the innovation side, I think because a lot of the innovation has come out of in the past from universities, which have a sort of a 3 to 5 year life cycle, grant life cycle, tenure and promotion, that kind of thing, we've moved real slow. And I think if you look, it used to be that if you wanted access to the internet or high-speed computing, you had to go to a university. I think we've missed that blossoming that's happened outside of those walls. And I've sensed that in terms of climate and ocean, we really are, the late Walter Monk from Scripps used to say the 20th century was the century of undersampling. we're a quarter of the way in, and we still are. We don't sample ecosystems. We don't sample the scales that ecosystems operate. And technology can help us on that. And I think we've missed a real opportunity by, in some sense, being kind of leisurely and doing our own thing to get our papers published and all the rest. That's good. You know, that paper in Nature is a real gold standard, but we miss a lot of excitement. I mean, that's what's great to see about this group, is that there's a lot more dynamics and things outside of that. That networking capability is, I think, really the big thing we've missed.
Oh, great points, and thank you for that. Yeah, I do think the future is collaborative, or even I like to say, like, the 2000s, right, with the iPhone, right, everything I prefix, right. I believe the prefix moving forward is co, right, co-create, co-build. So I think there's a lot there as well. So thank you for that. MK, how about you?
I think there's, I'm certainly not an expert on oceans, as all know, but in terms of the sort of the counterpart to it on the climate science end, for me, there's maybe 2 or 3 areas. One, we haven't sufficiently, until very recently, approached the looming and unfolding climate catastrophe with a sort of an ethic, as it were, or a modality for building out solutions that are fit for purpose and scale. And then we've also focused, or we've also not focused on justice-based solutions. And so these problems, I would say, are endemic in the foundational documents, right? The overwhelming sort of focus that, again, heads of state and people will act rationally, they'll follow science, when, of course, nothing could really be, further from the truth. And so we think that, we just have to do these greenhouse gas inventories and people will behave themselves and act rationally and will reduce and check this problem. That I think simply is a pathway to ignoring the focus, one, on justice, looking at those that are harmed disproportionately by particular problems like the climate crisis. And in so doing, what we see is we basically entrench injustice in some of our solutions. And then also, we don't scale these things at the biggest level that we possibly could. We don't do them really at this in a reaction and response to the scale of the problem. And I think that's a big problem. And that's actually a problem I would offer to all of us, and we can have a discussion on this, that the current administration is confronting, right? We don't just need to reduce greenhouse gases. We need, literally trillions of dollars to go to those that have already been harmed and are being harmed by this unfolding crisis. And so the failure to, commit significant resources is one that the current administration is still grappling with. At last count that I looked at it today, I think they've only invited, I think that they're about in the 40s in terms of the countries that they're going to invite to the coming, April summit in just, a fortnight's time, more or less, 22 and 23. Well, that's, 2/3 of the planet's missing. So the key, the largest economy is forgetting 2/3 of the planet, not even inviting them to the table. That's a failure of being fit for purpose, fit for scale, and focusing on justice. And that's a legacy problem that we've had on climate policy. And it's something that we've got to actively get out ahead of. Because right now, just look at some of the solutions, and not to go on, but just by way of conclusion, we've got rogue utilities in all of the states where you all are, and all of the jurisdictions, if you're not in states in the US, that are actively being the embargo against the cheapest way to generate electricity. They're actively doing this. So that's blocking the solution. That's not giving us the sort of being fit for scale and fit for purpose. And then it also is entrenching injustice. We know that the cheapest way for generating energy is not just renewables, but it also happens to be the cleanest way to do it. So when we block that, we block access to what's clean and what's green and what's appropriate, especially for folks on the margin. So.
Great answer. I really love to say, we have to have inclusion by design, right, for the solutions that we're developing. And the regenerative perspective, there's a lot of movement toward actually leveraging indigenous populations as well, because when you think about those populations that have actually had the low carbon footprint, lived sustainably, it's in fact the people who've been there all along that we can leverage so much knowledge from. And as you mentioned, 2/3 of the planet, there's a lot there that we're still missing from. So we need all the help we can get. And, at the end of the day, I think people forget it's one planet. And even if we're cleaning up our act, it doesn't mean anything if we're not all doing the same thing towards a shared goal. So appreciate that. The next question I have, I'll throw it back to you, MK, is I like to say that there's a feedback loop between policy driving innovation and innovation driving policy. We're now in a time where innovation can't wait on policy, right? So how can leaders in ocean and climate science work to move the needle on policy? For example, on the ocean side, the US is only responsible for 1% of global aquaculture.
I think, I don't know if we can so much separate these things. I really think, they really are inseparable, perhaps. People, the sort of stereotype is, firms don't want regulation. They don't want to have anything to do with policy. They want free markets. Nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that there's, I think, a need, if we put the innovation burden on the firm, which may not be all that accurate in the first place, but let's just, for sake of the argument and the question, if we say that it's firms that are driving innovation, they do need a certain amount of regulatory coherence. They do need coherent policies. They do need, good signaling that's rooted in, empiricism, science, coherence. So I think that there's and when you get that, you can actually see, big breakthroughs that get accelerated. I think that's the case with, on the energy side, on renewable side, on a lot of the sort of the suite of climate solutions. The fact of the matter is that while some people are, whatever, talking heads on television are knocking the current administration about the Green New Deal and so forth, really the commitment, the multi-trillion-dollar commitment of the current administration isn't sort of creating out of whole cloth, green infrastructure, as it were. It's basically just putting wind in the sails of machinery that's already underway, that's already moving forward. It's giving that sort of the coherent policy framework that really keeps that process going. And it's only with coherent policies that we're going to have breakthroughs in that, what I talked about before, that renewable embargo that a lot of utilities in many jurisdictions, both domestically and abroad, have imposed. We have to sort of break through that with good policies. So these things, I think they go together. And it's that joining that gives us the true, acceleration of innovation.
Absolutely. And I think that's a synergy that, and I'm seeing some of the chat going as well on this, that I think there's a lot of hope that we can start building more of that synergy, hopefully moving forward. Mark, curious to hear your thoughts as well.
So I think what we've been doing for the last 30 years is a lot of science and policy. And I think, I'll be honest, I think a lot of times scientists come in very naive and think, if I just give you the right science, you'll do the right policy, and forgetting that policy encompasses a lot of other factors. There's culture, there's history, there's values, there's economic or other things that play, that just having scientists in there, and you've seen this even during the pandemic, science changes all the time. I mean, we learned, and it is one very important input factor, no doubt about it. But I think one of the things in the climate and ocean world that we just haven't engaged effectively yet is, and it's not just the Exxon Mobils of the world, it's in really engaging the private sector writ large. Satya Nadella from Microsoft responded last week to an interview. He said, I'm looking for profitable solutions for people and the planet. And ultimately, we really want to try and come up with those sort of mission economy ideas that bring together capabilities and people can actually make a living on this. And there are good opportunities out there for people to make money and do right by the planet and right by people, as MK was saying. And I think we've tended to just talk too much to the government agencies, and governments are governments. They work even slower than universities. And yet the private sector, how do we harness part of that? And I think that that's something. I know I see Russell saying profitable, and that part of the problem. I don't think it has to be. I think it has been, but I think, the fact that people, when they have more security, take better care of the environment because they're not just living day to day, is a good thing. And I think we've got to be more open and not just shut those doors down.
Well, that leads perfectly into my next question, which is how might we better facilitate collaboration and tangible impact for ocean and climate science stakeholders, both in the public and private sectors? Mark, I think you're on a great train of thought, so I'll throw it back to you.
Okay. We'll take that. If I knew, I would be doing that right now. It's hard. I think that that's one of the things that, there are all sorts of blue economy opportunities out there. MK's leading a venture capital fund. A lot of industries are looking at this as well, particularly in the private sector. I mean, I'm really interested in the kind of fund that MK talked about at the beginning. I think that more of those can be out there. You can talk to some of the folks at the big reinsurance industries, agents, companies like AXA XL. They're trying to say, are there financial instruments that not only improve behavior and protect against harm, but actually increase resilience and make healthier ecosystems? They're trying to take a much broader view and a longer timescale view. And I was involved with the high-level panel part of the UN decade. It came out of the World Economic Forum over the last year. They have a lot of, and it goes way beyond me. MK probably understands it because he's in the finance world. But there are all sorts of new ways to make financial instruments that change behavior and lead to profitable solutions for people and planet. And I think that I think we've just got to look at new ways to do it.
And so on that this, alone is, sorry,
go ahead, Daniel. Go ahead.
I was going to say that alone is an opportunity for innovation in itself, right? Developing those financial mechanisms. And I know, we have incoming carbon credits, right? And I've heard discussion of plastic credits as well. I'm still wrapping my head around it all, plus NFTs. But all of that together, right? There is so much opportunity for developing these mechanisms. So I'm sure, MK, you might have better insight than I do on that.
Well, I'll say this, and this may be, well, certainly it will be anathema and antithetical to, the presumed business associations that I have. I would say the next sort of monumental challenge that we face will be putting sufficient gates and parameters around that stuff that is absolutely increasingly profitable, the most lucrative, that also is, at parity with planet, people, and profits. I don't need, 20% unlevered IRR on solar projects to make money. I'm happy to take, 14, 15%. I certainly don't need, 25, 30 or more percent. Now, it's not my job to go before utilities where I see those kind of returns on projects and say, please don't give me so much money. My job actually is to play the fool and worry that, well, this is too low, 31%. Normally in these other markets, I'm getting 35, So now, obviously, that is the tried and true recipe for privatizing all the gains and socializing as much as the harm. That is, what is fundamentally wrong. And that is what has put the whole planet in such a pothole. Now, I think we need folks that are aware of that on the regulatory side. Some are. On the policy side, setting rules. If you do that kind of rulemaking smartly, that's actually, in a short sort of way, without going into all the math and things, but which I can share papers and things with folks if they want. That's actually how you pay off the Green New Deal. That's not only how you pay for it, but that's actually how you take money from, investing in green, renewable energy and so forth, and move some of that money into education system, move it into healthcare, move it into, improving infrastructure, outside of, sort of delivery of energy and so forth. But we need to have those rules. We need to have rules of the game that are rooted in justice. And if we do, I'll offer to you and I'll argue that folks like myself on the money side, as it were, can make more than we need for a long time. And we can deliver critical resources, whether it be energy or water or education, you name it, to society writ large at little to no cost. And really change the way humanity is across the globe. Now, are policymakers thinking about that? Are they really committed to that? Certainly that embarrassment of a previous administration didn't have any sort of modalities in that regard. Many others aren't really focused in that. We need to. I would say that is the space where we've got to push, because that's the space where we can really, really change things. Right now, just to give an example, again, by way of closure, solar projects, the ones that I do on the utility scale, commercial, industrial, big projects, we have margin zero maintenance. We've got a worldwide average of 6-year payback and falling. That number is falling on 20-year, 25-year assets. So 2/3 to 3/4 of the asset act more like an annuity than they do like an infrastructure debt. So there's a huge amount of money in the system, and that's actually only going to increase. So there's a lot of resources that we can use elsewhere, still make whole and make very wealthy those that are on the money side, but also share resources in ways and tackle things like paying for energy as a right to not the bottom 10th of the society, but half or more of society. So those are I think, future challenges. That's really where we have to put our attention to when we look at the math. And that, by the way, that math is all awful neoclassical 19th century math. Okay, that's not full cost accounting. That's not ecological economics. When you do that kind of math, then the prospects get even better. So with bad math from 2 centuries ago, we can share a lot of resources with a lot of people. When you do proper accounting, ecological economics, you can share even more. But that really isn't, I would say, the core of where the policymakers are oriented, but where they need to be.
Yeah, and I think also just, again, natural capital is such an emerging term for people to understand that is a form of capital, right? And that as people learn, as we, I guess, really have investors who value that as part of their investment, it's going to definitely shift the landscape as we start developing these solutions and develop these new mechanisms, for sure. I'm going to move on to our next question, and we're going to shift, I guess, a little away from the technical and get back to some more general, and then we'll, again, be jumping into the Q&A in about 10 minutes or less. So the next question I have is, what are the most valuable lessons in leadership you've learned in your career that current and aspiring leaders should know? Dr. Dorsey, I'll throw it back to you on this one.
Well, I think it goes back to, Mark's earlier point about fearlessness. I think part of being, fast and first and efficient is, I wouldn't quite say it in the typical aggressive, breaking things, not giving a damn. I'm not quite aligned along those ways, as you may suspect, but it's really about not being afraid to be first, to be, the most efficient in order to be first. So I think that is, for me, the sort of the secret sauce, as it were, to really leading in a best in class way, because that's a kind of disposition that when you are fearless, you can ask for relatively easy things that sometimes you might have been afraid to ask for, but you certainly need. And then you can also make outrageous asks at the same time. So I would put, basically, if I was a betting person, which I'm not, all the chips on fearlessness.
That's a great point. And even one of the things I've been learning in my journey, there's this whole push to develop your big, hairy, audacious goal for your business, your 10-year plan, which as a grounded realist, I absolutely struggled with, but I finally came to last month. And it is absolutely leaning into that fearlessness over logic, which as an engineer is very difficult for me. But, great point. Mark, curious to hear your answer as well.
So again, agree, as we call them, the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goal. It's important, and the fearlessness, spot on. I think there's another, and maybe it's a little more mundane, that again, it goes back to that humility, that willingness to work with a lot of people that are very different than you, have very different experience, and to not just say, I can use them, I can actually learn, and we can learn together. And my career, as an oceanographer or whatever, was learning to work with a person who really knew electronics. I mean, they were not a PhD, but they knew a lot more about how the ocean worked and how to get something in the water and get it back than I did. And I think that lesson, that hands-on, not only with the technology, but with people, and with people who could use the data and knowledge you gain. And it's not just coming in as a prophet and saying, here it is, go read those golden tablets and, my paper. Really listening and learning, as part of that fearlessness is the willingness to say, I don't know everything. And that to me leads to a leader that can really at least try and understand what people bring and appreciate what they bring. When I was my last 6 months as director of WHOI, we were locked down, but trying to understand all the stresses on everybody to really try and bring that sympathy. And it's really beyond just sympathy. It's really trying to accommodate and meet and help people succeed. That, they call it servant leadership. But I think that's the part that you've really got to bring. And that comes part of that, all things digital. Anybody out there now has access to data, computation, enormous amounts of tools now. It's not just you as the leader or somebody inside a university. It's really democratized, and that's threatening to a lot of people because, your place of power and influence is kind of diminished. And I think it doesn't have to be seen that way. It shouldn't be seen that way. It should be seen as, this enriches my life. And that's what makes a leader, is that every situation is something you can learn from and be better.
That's a great point as well. And, I do think, and I think it echoes something that you said earlier too, as far as, what we're experiencing here in Miami with a lot of people coming from Silicon Valley, they like to use the term tech bros, people who hear the ego first before you actually get to, validate their skill set and value they bring, right, to back it up. And it is very much that right now, especially when it comes to the climate space, right? There's no room for that. The greater needs of the planet outweigh stoking egos by by far. All right, I'm going to fit in one last question before we jump to Q&A. And that question is, what advice do you have for aspiring leaders looking to make change for ocean and climate impact who may not even have a scientific background? Mark, I'll throw it back to you.
Oh, okay. We don't have a science background.
Interdisciplinary.
Yeah, I would say that the issue is to have confidence in that you bring something important, but also have that humility. It's again, balancing that humility, that thirst for knowledge. I mean, if you read Edmondson's book, she talks to Ray Dalio. Ray runs, Bridgewater, big, kind of an interesting organization. I'm not sure I met Ray, but Ray says every time he walks in the room, his view is not to tell people what to do, but to learn what they know so that they can all do better. And having a PhD doesn't necessarily mean you know a lot. You may know a lot about something very small, and that's really good, but you need to figure, how do I broaden that? And again, that's, I think, what Dr. Dorsey's been saying on the climate side and financial instruments and public policy. Sitting in rooms with people like him and others is, you're going to learn. You may go in and say, I don't know a lot about that, but you are going to learn, and you'll be able to be that impactful leader.
MK, same question for you.
I think a couple of things. I first, the question reminds me of a good friend and a colleague's book, to be offering up books. It's called Street Science, Community Knowledge and Environmental Health Justice, by a buddy of mine who is out at UC Berkeley, a fellow called Jason Coburn, who used to be the chair of planning and now is just in the planning department. And I think the core of the book, if there was one, and there are many sort of nuggets and cores to it, but it is not a sort of a religious belief in formal science. So I would challenge this idea that, is it even possible for someone not to have scientific background? They may not have formal scientific training, right? But I would simply question this notion that someone is without science, particularly someone who's thinking through problems, trying to approach problems in some kind of organized, rational way. So I would want to question that, because I think that line of thinking is a line of thinking that actively discards different forms and kinds of knowledge making and knowledge production, and ultimately is dangerous, right? Again, to go back to the point that I made, when we started, if the scientists, had any sort of secret sauce and tricks, those great institutions, and many of whom some of us have degrees from and so forth, the idea that the communities in which those institutions sit would be surrounded by the sea of problems in which they sit wouldn't be the case. But the opposite is actually true. So the first would be sort of to question that idea that some folks would be just without science and devoid of it. And then I think along the way, for me, two things come in mind that relate to that sort of street science, as it were, community knowledge. One, working in teams. Unfortunately, some people might call it networking. I'm not keen on that term, but be that as it may, I think in this country in particular, and really perhaps around the world, because of the sort of the cultural imperialism of the American project, we have sold the lie of the sort of the hero, the Superman, the Superwoman, these sort of cultural hagiographies. Even Martin Luther King. Utter nonsense, particularly since we just celebrated just a few days ago, April 4, his assassination. This was a highly networked individual. This was someone who was delivering this social movement project, the civil rights project, in a network way. It wasn't just this individual, right? Even on the day he was killed, he was with a whole group of folks in that network. Reverend Jesse Jackson was up there on that balcony just after he was shot. So there's a whole network of folks. So I would encourage people to look and draw on and be a part of networks, because I think that is, in the sort of Margaret Mead way, it's that small group of people that really deliver us the big breakthroughs. And I think when you really look at big breakthrough projects, you see that over and over and over again. So that puts, I think, a big burden for folks not to be pretending to be alone, because they never really are. Even if you are some bench scientist thinking you're all by yourself, you're not, because you're steeped in a literature that's networked and so forth. So I would put a big emphasis on that, and leveraging that to get access to resources, get access to infrastructures, get access to the key things that you need to deliver those impacts and deliver those breakthroughs.
And that, I just like to say, is why we have panels like this and are so happy to have you part of our network, because we need to have your expertise and these thoughts out there for people to realize that, you know, it's only up to people's initiative to actually take advantage of these resources around them. And so thank you both for sharing all of these insights. We're going to move on to our Q&A. So Christina, would you like to unmute to ask your question? Because I know you asked quite a few good ones.
So many questions. Thank you. Christina Conklin, calling from near the Bay Area in California. And I wanted to hear a little bit more. So I'm an artist and a writer, and I think so much of this is about the storytelling that we're doing and the terms of engagement. You've been talking about, you know, everything from environmental economics to sort of paradigm shifting, you know, challenging old ideas of colonialism and you know, telling a new story. And so I have two questions, and one is where do you go for your inspiration in terms of telling the new story, the writers and the like, and then how do we each take that challenge forward in our own lives to how would you suggest in terms of telling these new stories and reaching higher levels of policy influence as we do so? Because I think it's easy to feel powerless, right, in our own little worlds. And you've been talking at very high level of, you know, government, academia, industry. I mean, I've got a book coming out in a few months on climate change in the ocean. I'm excited about it. But to me, it's like, how do we, anyway, storytelling and inspiration is what I'm asking about. Thanks.
Is that for me or for Mark?
Each of you, please.
Each of you spoke first, MK. You start.
Yeah. So, you know, for me, you know, there's perhaps a reason why we have, you know, 2 ears and 1 mouth. And, you know, having started, you know, my career in engineering, but ended it, you know, in anthropology, you know, really essentially trained as an ethnographer, you know, I'm absolutely keen, if you couldn't tell from, you know, being interested in a book called Street Science, into really listening and learning as the basis for deriving and building narrative and building insights and obtaining insights. I fundamentally don't believe that people are, you know, disempowered and trapped and scared. You know, that may be sometimes a gut reaction that you get, you know, when someone is going around with a microphone and so forth. But when you really sit and listen to people, you find that they may be mad and pissed and annoyed at certain processes, but they've got ideas about how to fix them. They probably have even proffered some of those ideas and tried to implement them in various ways. They probably battled, you know, bureaucracies and institutions. Those stories may not be front and center, but you find a huge, I think, amount of, I don't like the word resilience, but we can call it that, but not just resilience, capacity and innovation when you just keep your mouth shut for a bit and listen to folks. And I think that you know, is a thing that really is sometimes lacking. And I also think that listening needs to be, you know, across a variety of stations and channels, as it were. And I mean that metaphorically. You know, we have to be listening at all levels. You know, I'm, you know, I've got preferences on intergenerational, you know, relationships and networks and things like this, and certainly cross-cultural. But I think it's that multi-spectrum listening that gives us the most robust policies, that allows us to do things that perhaps we haven't done before, and also reach people that haven't been reached. And we see this playing out empirically, you know, time and time again when it happens. You know, so that's sort of some, you know, key things, you know, for me. The books, I could go on and on and on and on, you know, books. So,
Mark, do you have anything to add as well?
Just to add a little bit. I mean, Christina, I think you're right. In some sense, science is a story, and we're telling a story. And we've got multiple authors in that story. The challenge for a lot of people, they say, I just want it, complete. I want it to be done, but it's never done. This is a story where, the planet it's always been changing. It's now changing because of things we're doing. We don't know how. We don't know where it's going to go because people can change behaviors. I mean, that now, our impact is so big that changes in energy sources, et cetera, can have a profound impact on the path that we're going to be on. So, in terms of, I'll just mention one book, may not be the most politically correct set of books, but it's something I always enjoy reading. It's actually the Patrick O'Brien series of novels of the Napoleonic Wars. And you say, wow, why do you like that? Well, one, you've got a naturalist who's out at sea, and there's a lot of great stuff about the ocean and how it works. So that's one. But I think what's really interesting is that the protagonist in there, the captain, who has a lot of flaws, but the thing that he brings to that ship is that willingness to, he talks repeatedly about being turned before the mast when he was a young midshipman and having to work the lower decks, and how he understood how the common British sailor had to live in the 19th century, and the appreciation that he brought to the job, and that he knew how to tie all the knots. Now, of course, he didn't do it. He didn't micromanage. He had everybody doing it, but he understood what it took, and he could enable people to be their best in a pretty awful situations when you read the books. I think those are really, to me, those are lessons of leadership. Of course, yeah, it's wartime and all the rest, but separate that out of how getting people to work together for very difficult, with lots of unexpected events, triumphs, defeats. That to me is something that science has to pick that up. It's not just a journey of perpetual progress. There are a lot of, remember, we didn't believe that the continents drifted until, the mid 20th century. Any little kid would look at the map and say, gosh, looks like South America fits into Africa. No, it doesn't work that way. Well, yes, it does. I'm still a kid who can remember in the pre-plate tectonic era. And, we went down a lot of bad pathways on that. And we've got to recognize that we're all trying to work together to make a better planet and better people.
And I just want to add a kind of current take on it too. I'm sure a lot of you may have heard about Seaspiracy and storytelling, right? And I think the most interesting piece that's relevant these days, especially, is storytelling to a fault where we're captured more in the story than necessarily fact. And that's the dangerous line of science and entertainment. I won't go deeper than that because that's a whole nother panel. But it's definitely its own can of worms. I'm going to throw to Jeanette to ask her question.
Hi, yes, this question is for Dr. Dorsey. You spoke about investment not just as a form of divestment from fossil fuels, but as a way to invest in climate solutions. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on public banks as a source of not just divestment again, but especially funding community level climate solutions that might not be attractive to the general free market and general public or other banks, private banks.
So that's a wonderful question, and I think that's one that's gonna both, require some rethinking and restructuring in the banking system, and particularly on the public banking side, and also it's going to require some new policy rules, and I give a couple of very specific examples. I gave a sort of a top shelf, comment about utilities doing their embargo against renewables, and that's sort of a point of fact depending on where you live and so forth. Really in the weeds, one of the, before you even get to utilities, particularly for residential consumers and clients, which we don't do much of, but is the FICO score. If you're not in the 700s, you don't qualify for loans, or you don't, if you don't have a house, for example, because you're a certain income class or multifamily housing, you don't necessarily get access to renewable energy. So there are some immediate structural problems that are set up to slow down and act as other kinds of embargoes. And that's before you even get into the banking sector at all. So some of those rules need to change because we've got a lot of good data that says the poorest of the poor, they actually pay their energy bills first and foremost, and they pay them just as well as wealthy people do. So the idea that you would tie credit worthiness to getting access to clean energy is, not just preposterous, but silly. It doesn't play out, and play out financially from a lot of data that we have. So that's before you get to banks. One of the other issues is that, well, on the banking side, a lot of banks are, they have, certain, capital floors that they don't want to go beneath. So we've got to create some spaces for them to go beneath those floors, to do sort of smaller loans, not just on the sort of residential side, but even for commercial projects. A lot of banks, they don't want to touch projects, some don't want to go below $1 million, which is quite a lot, for, residential consumer and so forth. So we need some new infrastructures that enable money flows to operate differently, particularly if we accept, and hopefully everybody on this call accepts, that we are facing a climate emergency. We're facing a crisis that we need to act, really quickly to get out ahead of. And so we need some of those structures. I think there's hope and promise on the public banking side, particularly now. There's some proposals made it through the House 2 times on green banking to build out a federal green bank architecture. Now, if we don't make some changes on the front end, that architecture could simply repeat some of the existing problems if we build it out. So I think there's possibilities, in the public banking realm, but we have to be attuned to some of the other sort of structural problems. And for more, be in touch, and I can share many, many things on this. We don't do much in the realm of LMI investments. We're doing some of that now, particularly in the Midwest. And one of the ways we've been doing it is we've been doing it in a way we've been bringing both philanthropic money, both in terms of absolute just grants, but also what we call PRI money, or program-related investment capital, which is just cheap capital to projects, and doing that in a way to basically reconfigure some of the economics of smaller projects that would be, make it more compelling for banks and so forth. So there's a lot of sort of things that need to change. But I think that there's hope and promise that stuff can happen.
All right, we're going to try to fit in one more question. I know we're running low on time here. Tristan, would you like to unmute to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me ask. And this has been a really engaging conversation. I'm calling in from Los Angeles, pretty heavily steeped in the media and storytelling environment. So I especially appreciated Christina's question. My question is, and sorry, this is kind of a big question, so just kind of touch on it however you can. But how do we shift to a culture of sufficiency and access versus the kind of legacy priority of accumulation and ownership? And I obviously have some hypotheses of my own as to why we kind of obsess over accumulation and the need for ownership versus access, but wanted to kind of get your take.
Well,
sorry, I just wanted to elaborate that could be physical things like transportation. It could also be ideas. So.
Well, this goes square in with respect to time, so we could please reach out. I hope, Daniel shared my contact information with everybody. Anyone who wants to email me, you certainly are able, you should do so. So, but this goes to the point I made earlier, about, this problem of, in the old mode of the firm, it was basically, a sort of a kleptocratic operation that, socialize a lot of harm and privatize mostly all the benefits, or as many of the benefits as they possibly can. The fact is that we don't have to continue to be in that space anymore, because some of the fundamental prices have changed. And that is a new space, by the way. There are very few things that are truly new. That is something that's really new. And so now, with renewables globally, for the first time in human history, became at the end of Q4 of 2020 the cheapest way to generate power. So, and that's only going to continue to be the case, and that's going to accelerate the deployment of renewables. But it's also going to create a space for moving away from accumulation, and we can set up good policies to do so. The hook, though, the crux is, will policymakers put those policies in place? Now, some of you all know that I've been involved in this thing called Sunrise Project, and that's not with my business hat, it's another hat on. We're trying to, prod some of those folks to do that. I think it's something that needs to be done. Lots of my fellow business people don't even want to talk about that sort of thing. They want to be in the old model of essentially making all of us, myself included, pay for that which is free, energy from the sun and the wind. And that's not apocryphal. That's becoming a point of fact. I told you that my O&M is margin zero. That's a real thing. And that's only going to get better. Some projects compete on getting that O&M numbers as low as possible. So we now have some of this is going to, the short answer is, it's going to hinge on better and good policy making to make it so. And that's going to be the crux. That won't come without struggle and fighting.
Any last thoughts from you, Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to take a little different spin, Tristan. It's just not on the storytelling so much, but this has been, if you look at higher education in the United States, or even just say North America, it's really been undergoing big changes over the last couple of decades. You can say, starting with distance education and massively online courses, et cetera. COVID has really pushed that model to the breaking point for a lot of universities. And universities are organized around disciplines and departments, personal achievement to get promotion and tenure. And the problems that we're trying to solve require much more dynamic communications and meshes and collaborations that go way beyond the university walls. There's a book called The Invisible College that talks about this. Universities don't control that anymore. They used to. They used to be the towers, the pillars. And I think that democratization of bringing together these collaboration networks, these knowledge ecosystems, where there are real close relationships between the people who create knowledge and those who use it, and it's two-way, it's not just a push out, is really transforming our higher education system. And I don't think most universities quite recognize it yet. But the sea has changed. And you can look at students and they're saying, why am I paying this? Why am I coming out with $500,000 in debt when I could get it online? And why am I paying this? I mean, how many universities are being sued right now for COVID? And now when NCAA athletes are soon going to be paid because they are, the farm team for the NFL and others and the NBA. And so this whole business model that has been erected over the last 100 years in this country is undergoing a profound shift. People are saying, I don't need that degree. I'm collaborating here. I'm learning there. I'm working together here. The question is, and in some sense, it's kind of like, what you're seeing in the blockchain world and the financial industry. It's becoming trust and relationships, and just validating those is going to be, it's the transformation you're seeing in the financial sector that's underway in the blockchain types of technologies is coming to a university near you, because at some point it's going to be who you know and how you can have an unassailable record of that transformation. Wow. And that knowledge.
Well, thank you both, first off. And I think I want to join everyone in saying thank you both for coming today and sharing all of your amazing insights. This has been definitely one of our most exciting panels yet. And, especially appreciate you guys staying on for answering a little over time. But again, everyone, I put your email in the chat, and Mark, I don't know if you're okay with sharing your information.
Sure.
But feel free to drop that in the chat as well. Sierra and Julie have been dropping some of our social media links and our Slack community links. We'll be keeping the conversation going. Happy to keep you guys involved as well. But please, everyone, join me in thanking Dr. M.K. Dorsey and Dr. Mark Abbott for coming today. This was an amazing panel. I'm going to share one quick reminder for our opportunities for sea change, and then we'll call it a day. So thank you all for coming. And here is the little reminder. Again, we have our opportunities for Sea Change open all the way until the end of the month. We're accepting applications for co-founders across all of our 6 verticals that we're working to co-found and co-build startups with you. Again, totally, prerequisite free opportunity. We'd love to have you all apply. And beyond that, it's right there on the top of our website, or actually when you go to the homepage, you'll be able to see it pop up as well. But again, as it's in the chat, there's all of our information for social media. Please feel free to reach out and connect with not only us, but our mentors. And we look forward to seeing you guys at our next events. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody. See y'all.